Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping delicately, possibly staggering, into the scandalous, sugar-dusted, and gently narcotic world of Victorian high society. That's right, tonight's sleep story is about something stronger than your triple espresso and more addictive than doom-scrolling opium-laced tea. Yes, we're talking about the poshest people in Britain sipping their worries away, with a little something extra in the pot, and then blaming their nervous condition on the weather. So before you float off into this deliriously Gentile nightmare, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy the absurdity I bring to your nightly routine. And if you feel moved, leave a comment with your favorite historical vice, or tell me where you're listening from. Now dim those lights, switch on a fan for that ambient hum or to drown out the ghosts of Queen Victoria's judgment, and get really comfortable. But let's pause for a moment and ask the real questions. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to be so rich that your afternoon pick-me-up came with a prescription for mild euphoria? Was opium tea really just the Victorian answer to oat milk lattes? Why did high society treat addiction like a hobby and call it delicate nerves? What did it mean to get a little too relaxed during tea time? Did people actually hallucinate their way through poetry readings and garden parties? And most importantly, how many vases did the average Victorian knock over before anyone realized the herbal infusion was more than just chamomile? Congratulations! You've just woken up at 1873. You're wearing 3 layers of uncomfortable clothing, there's a peacock judging you from the window, and someone just handed you a cup of tea that may or may not contain enough opium to put an elephant to sleep. Good luck! It's the 1870s. And somehow, every woman in your social circle is swooning dramatically at least twice a week. The vapors are not, as you'd hoped, the result of a mysterious spa day, but an umbrella term for everything from mild anxiety to full-blown existential crisis. What's the cure? Why, a warm cup of opium-laced tea. Of course, doctor's orders. It's self-care Victorian style. Let's set the scene. You're seated on a tufted velvet settee, surrounded by more doilies than any rational person could possibly dust, and you've just heard a piece of shocking news. Someone in town has purchased a slightly less expensive hat than you. The pressure on your chest is immediate. A faint, unsteady sigh escapes your lips. "I have the vapors," you declare. And within moments, an attentive maid appears, ready to offer a small porcelain cup of tea that smells faintly of poppies and denial. The vapors are an ailment as mysterious as your Aunt Petunia's rheumatic gout, and about as scientific. No one quite knows what they are, but everyone knows how to get them, especially if it means a socially acceptable excuse to lie down in the drawing room and let someone else worry about dinner.
For a brisk walk, far too risky. You might sweat, or worse, be seen. You simply summon the household medical advisor. He's a man with a bushy mustache, a medical bag, and exactly zero intention of diagnosing you with anything that can't be solved by a good story and a stronger beverage. After a brief, solemn examination, consisting mostly of taking your pulse and asking if you felt unsettled, he prescribes a hot infusion laced with a few magical drops of laudanum. This is followed by a very grave warning: rest. Avoid reading upsetting novels, and by no means should you attempt to use your brain for anything strenuous. If you're thinking this is just a way for Victorian women to take a break from the relentless grind, you're only half right. Men, too, were occasionally afflicted, usually after tax season or especially vigorous rounds of croquet. But women were the professionals. There were fainting couches, smelling salts, and an entire wardrobe dedicated to rest cures. These were not so much medical treatments as polite forms of time out. A faint in the right company could rescue you from any number of awkward social situations. Bored by your neighbor's opinions on steam engines? Collapse gracefully and wait for someone to hand you a biscuit. Now, opium-laced tea was not just a household staple. It was a symbol of your refinement. The more nervous you were, the more fashionable your anxieties. Social hierarchies formed around who could look the most delicate, the most unwell, the most in need of a restorative. There's an art to this. You must look ethereal, never actually unwell. Too much color in your cheeks, and you're dismissed as robust, far too practical for polite company. It's like wellness culture today, but instead of green juice, you're bragging about your favorite tonic and how it soothes your busy mind. Of course, the darker truth lingers in the background. Beneath the lace and perfumed linens is a genuine struggle with depression, exhaustion, and the numbing effects of daily life in a world where women's ambitions are confined to tea tables and marriage prospects. So, while you drift off feeling the warmth of your opium-laced cup, remember Victorian self-care came with side effects. You might miss the next poetry reading because you accidentally nap through dinner. And so the age of nervous afflictions rolls on, fueled by equal parts repression and really questionable pharmaceuticals. You're not weak, you're just a product of your time. A little overdressed, a little over-medicated, and always, always ready for another cup of tea. Tomorrow you'll rally. After all, there's a new bonnet to faint over. And that, dear listener, is Victorian resilience in its most drowsy, floral form. Picture this. It's a rain-soaked Tuesday in 1873, and you've just been told by your mother-in-law that your flower arrangements lack emotional depth. Your nerves are jangling, your corset is on its third wind, and all you want is something, anything, that will make your mind as pleasantly numb as your left foot. So you do what any respectable Victorian would do. You slip out of the house, umbrella in hand, and head to your favorite apothecary. Not the flashy chemist on the main street, mind you, but the one tucked away in a cobblestone alley, sandwiched between a shop that sells mourning bonnets and the mysterious business that appears to specialize in leeches. You step inside, and the bell above the door gives a gentle tinkle, as if welcoming you to a world where discretion is the only rule. The air smells like damp wood, licorice root, and secrets. Glass jars line the shelves, each with handwritten labels: Mother's Helper, Gentleman's Cordial, Dr. Weatherby's Invigorating Salts. But you're not here for anything so pedestrian. You're here for the real menu. The apothecary's secret selection, known only to those with the right combination of social standing, desperation, and trust in alternative medicine. The proprietor, a man with sideburns you could lose a child in, greets you with a knowing nod. You lower your voice and say the code phrase, "I find myself in need of a little tranquility." Instantly, he slides a heavy ledger across the counter, opens it to the middle, and lets you scan the list of discreet remedies. The usual chamomile and peppermint blends are there, but so is the real star. Special soothing tea, infused with laudanum, morphia, and a hint of orange blossom for aftertaste. It's the Victorian equivalent of a triple-shot latte with whipped cream and a secret stash of happiness. You order your blend, trying not to look as eager as you feel. The apothecary doesn't bat an eye. He scoops the tea leaves into a brown paper packet, adds a tiny bottle of amber liquid, and wraps it all up with the sort of care normally reserved for crown jewels. Payment is always in cash. No one wants this transaction written in the family account book. There's a wink, a polite cough, and a mutual agreement that nothing illegal or even remotely interesting has just transpired. At home, you prepare your cup with ritual seriousness. The kettle hisses, steam rises, and you measure out exactly
the amount of infusion recommended for a restful afternoon, double if it's been an especially social week. The first sip is bitter, tinged with the faint memory of citrus, and before long you feel your muscles relax, your worries float away, replaced by a gentle, fuzzy euphoria. You could absolutely write a novel, solve your household's accounts, or, more likely, doze off upright in the armchair while the cat reclaims your lap for the third time today. Here's the magic of the apothecary's secret menu. It promises relief from everything life throws at you, from existential dread to the tedium of polite conversation. Got a headache?
Trouble sleeping? Chronic sense of dread after the opera? There's a tea for that. The Victorians trusted their apothecaries the way we trust Google reviews, except nobody ever leaves a 1-star rating, even if they hallucinate a bit of extra embroidery on the curtains. Modern medicine looks back at this with a shudder, but for you, living in the moment, the science is beside the point. This is what self-care looks like in an era before Wi-Fi, noise-cancelling headphones, or affordable therapy. It's a private world of bittersweet remedies and silent solidarity. You, your apothecary, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes bliss comes in a cup you don't discuss at dinner. And if anyone asks why your eyes look particularly dreamy during charades tonight, just smile and say, it's the orange blossom. After all, every era has its little secrets. You're just lucky yours is so deliciously relaxing. Welcome to the upper crust, where the carpets are plush, the conversations are sharper than the dessert knives, and, if you want to be truly accepted, your collection of fashionable vices is just as important as your family crest. In the glittering world of Victorian high society, nothing says I've arrived quite like a monogrammed bottle of laudanum artfully arranged on your tea tray, nestled between the imported Assam and a suspiciously heavy silver spoon. Let's be honest, wealth in the Victorian era isn't about how much you own, but how well you can accessorize your suffering. The most envied ladies and gents are not the healthiest, nor the happiest, but the ones who suffer from the most refined, expensive, and crucially fashionable maladies. A touch of melancholia, perfect nerves so delicate that a stiff breeze makes you consider a weekend in Bath even better. And the only way to properly manage such burdens is with a personal stash of high-grade pharmaceutical miracles. The polite set wouldn't dream of admitting to something as gauche as addiction. No. This is a matter of constitution, of being too finely tuned for ordinary existence, too sensitive to endure a world where the help never quite polishes the banisters, and someone at the club is always misusing the word nouveau. The solution? A regular, measured dose of medicinal opium, prescribed naturally by your family physician, who is also a close friend and partial shareholder in 3 separate patent medicine companies. Afternoon tea is where the real posturing happens. Forget gossip about the Queen's corgis or debates over the best biscuit. The subtle flex is in how you prepare your cup. A touch more syrup, please, Simpkins. With a flick of the wrist and a practiced slightly tremulous sigh, you signal to the room that you are both in need of medical relief and effortlessly at the forefront of wellness trends. If you're truly sophisticated, you'll have your laudanum decanted into a crystal vial, or perhaps a cunning little perfume bottle for easy travel, because nothing says old money like a pocket-sized tincture, ready for emergencies ranging from sudden rain showers to your third cousin's engagement announcement. And don't think this is just a ladies' game. Gentlemen, too, have joined the medicinal arms race. A well-stocked dressing table includes not just cologne and mustache wax, but a discreet velvet pouch containing the latest nerve tonic, a blend of alcohol, opium, and just enough quinine to suggest a vague connection to colonial adventure. Sporting men might even boast of their stimulant injections delivered naturally by the family's private doctor before the fox hunt. It's less about health and more about status. Anyone can own a horse, but only the truly fashionable ride out with just a whisper of pharmaceutical courage in their veins. Of course, this ritual comes with rules. Dosing is to be done discreetly, never so much as to cause a scene. Heaven forbid you should nod off during a poetry recital and tumble into the piano. Etiquette books quietly advise that any guest requiring medicinal refreshment during dinner must excuse themselves with a vague reference to the air or a recent attack of nerves. The secret is to be just unwell enough to be interesting, but never so ill that you can't keep up with the latest scandal or miss the cotillion. The irony is everyone is in on it. Your stash is not so much hidden as it is displayed artfully in a way that suggests you're both above and apart from the rabble. A little too much, and you're whispered about. Too little, and you're just another dull, robust soul with nothing to recommend you but clear eyes and suspiciously steady hands. So here you are, part of a world where social climbing requires just as much chemistry as conversation. Your place in the drawing room is secured not by birthright alone, but by the quality and subtlety of your vices. All you need is a steady hand, a silver spoon, and an understanding that in Victorian society, the right stash is worth its weight in inherited land. Afternoon tea, the cornerstone of Victorian social life, a bastion of civilization, and, unbeknownst to the uninitiated, a quietly sanctioned portal to another dimension. At precisely 4 o'clock, you find yourself swept into the parlor, corset cinched to within an inch of your life, surrounded by furniture so floral you're not entirely sure where the wallpaper ends and the sofa begins. The table groans beneath a regiment of cakes, scones, and delicately curling cucumber sandwiches. But it's the teapot, plump, steaming, and a little bit sinister, that's the real star of the show. On the surface, everything is exquisite. There's gentle laughter, a clink of fine porcelain, and the sort of polite conversation that can make the weather last 40 minutes. But underneath, beneath the ruffles and the ringlets, Victorian society is teetering on the edge of a collective existential crisis. And they're doing it in style. Because today's special blend is not just Darjeeling, it's been fortified with a few careful drops of laudanum, turning your average tea party into a slightly psychedelic salon. The first sign that something is amiss is the dreamy look in Lady Pringle's eyes. She hasn't blinked in 6 minutes, and her commentary on azalea cultivation has taken on an almost spiritual intensity. Across the table, Miss Weatherby is having an animated conversation with her teaspoon. Everyone nods along. After all, you don't want to appear unsophisticated, or worse, unwell in front of your peers. It's understood. We're all floating together. You take your cup with extra sugar, just in case. The flavor is a little different, brighter, almost effervescent. A gentle warmth spreads from your chest to your fingertips. Suddenly, the ticking of the grandfather clock is the most profound thing you've ever heard. What is time, really? And why does the wallpaper have such strong opinions about your hairstyle? This is the Victorian existential crisis. A room full of people, each secretly terrified of being boring, or worse, irrelevant. There's no Instagram to validate your existence, no therapy to talk you down from the ledge of another social season, just tea, gossip, and the comforting knowledge that everyone else is, at this very moment, questioning the meaning of it all in a haze of narcotic politeness. And let's be clear, this isn't the fun sort of party where someone ends up playing charades on the billiard table. No, this existential crisis is managed, curated, and, most importantly, never, ever acknowledged out loud. Instead, it's gently diffused with idle talk of lace patterns, the latest penny dreadful, or a heated debate over whether Lady Chesham's new hat is a bold statement or a cry for help. The answer, as always, is yes. The etiquette is elaborate. If your mind starts to wander, just smile serenely and ask the person next to you how they manage their azaleas. If you accidentally let slip that you're pondering the infinite void, claim you were only thinking about the color of the drawing room curtains. Never let anyone know you're struggling to remember whether the cat always had 3 tails or if that's just today's blend working its magic. Meanwhile, the stakes are high. Too much existential tea, and you risk drifting off in the middle of Lord Pob's third retelling of his Crimean adventures. Too little, and you'll be the only one left to refill the sugar bowl, an unforgivable faux pas. There's a delicate balance between polite inebriation and outright bewilderment. And everyone's aiming for that sweet spot where nothing matters quite as much as the next slice of Battenberg. Eventually, as the sun slants through the dusty parlor windows, the party disperses. You're left with a lingering sense of connection, a vague recollection of someone quoting Aristotle, and the firm knowledge that yes, you made it through another afternoon in Victorian society, 12% more existential, 100% more polite. And when someone asks how tea was, you just smile and say, "Transcendent, darling." Because in this world, understatement is everything.
Let's talk about neurasthenia, female hysteria, or the ever-popular brain fatigue. The diagnosis is never the problem. The cure is where things get interesting. A swirl of quackery and innovation. The medical solution to just about any problem is simple. Pour something new into your tea. Why spend time outside or talk about your feelings when you could trust the miracle of chemistry? Your doctor prescribes a blend of opium, morphine, and a sprinkle of invigorating salts, plus whatever else is trending in the latest medical pamphlet, usually written by someone who failed out of BOT. You stare at the bottle of laudanum and wonder if it's normal for a medicine to be both a household staple and the main ingredient in Aunt Harriet's sponge cake. It is. In fact, if your medicine cabinet doesn't look like the ingredients list for a dramatic novel, you're simply not trying hard enough. Laudanum for nerves, cocaine tooth drops for teething, arsenic wafers for pallor. There's a remedy for every occasion, each one more questionable than the last. And if you're worried about safety, don't be. The bottles all have lovely calligraphy and a reassuring label, "By Royal Appointment." The science of the era is mostly guesswork with a dash of showmanship. Doctors are fond of words like humors, vital energy, and restorative compounds, and they wield them with the confidence of a modern fitness influencer explaining macros. No matter the affliction, the prescription is likely to involve a soothing beverage, absolute bed rest, and the strict avoidance of emotional excitement. Unless, of course, excitement is caused by reading lurid novels, in which case it's heartily encouraged, but never mentioned aloud. Here's the twist. For all the mockery, these remedies often work, at least until the side effects catch up with you. Sure, you're free of anxiety, but now you're seeing sounds and tasting colors. Your doctor tells you this is perfectly normal, a sign of improvement, he assures you, scribbling something illegible on your chart and pocketing a small bottle for his own use. If you're a gentleman, you might experiment with self-dosing, inspired by thrilling articles in The Lancet about continental advances in galvanic therapies or electric corsets. If you're a lady, you are gently reminded to trust the wisdom of the professionals, and, if possible, avoid reading about female troubles in the Times, lest your symptoms multiply from suggestibility alone. To be fair, not every Victorian cure is pure lunacy. Sometimes you'll be prescribed fresh air, a glass of water, or even a walk, provided you're properly chaperoned and avoid muddy shoes. But most often, the science behind your sip is simply the comforting knowledge that someone somewhere is working very hard to keep you just sedated enough to stop asking questions. So you swallow your dose, sip your fortified tea, and remind yourself that progress, much like your medicine, is best taken with a grain of salt, and maybe a biscuit, just in case the room starts spinning again. It's Thursday at noon, and the parlor is awash in filtered sunlight, polished silver, and the faint whiff of floral sachets stuffed into every available drawer. You are, of course, not alone. Today is ladies' luncheon, a sacred ritual of Victorian high society where rules are plentiful, sandwiches are tiny, and every teacup hides a story. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the hum of anticipation. Or perhaps it's just the low-grade laudanum buzz shared by most of the guest list. You're dressed to impress, which in Victorian terms means you're encased in at least 3 petticoats, a bodice that could deflect small arms fire, and a hat designed to block the sun from Sussex to Scotland. The doorbell rings at precisely the correct moment. Enter your friends. Lady Henshaw, whose laughter sounds suspiciously like a Bach, Miss Agnes, who is always recuperating, and Mrs. Featherstone, who arrives with the confident air of a woman who once seduced a bishop and got away with it. The opening ceremony is deceptively simple. You gather around the lace table, where the silver gleams, and the sandwiches look like the results of a botched magic trick. One bite, and they disappear forever. A maid, silent, efficient, probably plotting her escape, pours the first round of tea. The host nods, and with a discreet clink, a tiny bottle of laudanum is produced from a velvet reticule. It's passed hand to hand, as casually as salt or scandal,
and everyone measures their own dose. Too much, and you'll nap through the dessert course. Too little, and you risk being alert enough to remember Lady Henshaw's story about her cousin's gout. The sweet spot? Just enough to blur the edges, but not so much that you mistake the aspidistra for your chaperone. Conversation lubricated by tea and tincture begins in earnest. There is news of engagements, a recounting of Lady Dempsey's unfortunate incident with the hedge tram, and spirited debate about which local physician has the handsomest handwriting. "I only trust a doctor whose prescriptions look like poetry," says Mrs. Featherstone, swirling her cup with theatrical flourish. You nod in agreement, unsure if she's talking about medicine or romance. Both, in this crowd, are often indistinguishable. It's during these luncheons that the real business of society is conducted. Marriages are engineered, charitable committees are stacked, and rivalries are gently sharpened over scones. Need a favor from the mayor's wife? Better catch her on her second cup, when she's at her most agreeable and least likely to remember you borrowed her husband's carriage for urgent church business. Want to discreetly spread a rumor? Drop it in the middle of the third course, when conversation has reached a comfortable, gently swirling chaos, and the truth is as malleable as warm butter. Of course, not everyone is equally adept at the ritual. There's always a newcomer, poor Miss Prentice, who tries to refuse the laudanum, insisting on clarity of mind. The others watch her with a sympathetic horror reserved for people who forget to bring umbrellas to the seaside. By dessert, she is staring with open terror as the rest of the table debates whether Queen Victoria's favorite spaniel was secretly French. Someone offers her a second helping of seed cake, which she accepts with trembling hands. She will learn, or she will never be invited back. As the luncheon drifts to a close, you feel the pleasant heaviness settling in. The parlor grows quiet, broken only by the occasional giggle or the gentle thud of Lady Henshaw's antimacassar. One by one, friends gather up their fans and their dignity, promising to write, visit, or at least send news of the next scandal. You, meanwhile, finish your tea, the world's edges softening just enough to make the afternoon sunshine look like a Turner painting.
Stands by with a list of complaints. Nightmares, teething, a mysterious cough, a rash that smells of despair, and what Victorians called excessive spirit, otherwise known as not sitting still for 6 hours at a stretch. The solution? No timeouts, no sticker charts. Instead, you reach for the family's bottle of soothing syrup, a miraculous potion that promises to cure anything from colic to existential dread. The label boasts an impressive list of ingredients: opium, alcohol, honey, and a dash of chloroform, all blended with the confidence of an era that truly believed in progress, provided that progress left everyone slightly dazed and a bit more manageable. One spoonful for the little darlings, and suddenly the nursery is calm, silent, and if you squint, almost angelic. No more shrieking, no more impromptu acrobatics involving the drapes. Just the gentle, rhythmic sound of well-medicated children snoring peacefully among their wooden toys. If you think this approach is extreme, remember the Victorians considered themselves pioneers of modern parenting. What could possibly be safer than a remedy endorsed by physicians and trusted by mothers everywhere? After all, the advertisements say so. And in a society obsessed with good manners and quiet afternoons, nothing ruins the delicate atmosphere of a ladies' luncheon like a child loudly developing character in the next room. It's not just babies either. Older children are managed with equal parts discipline and pharmacology. Suffering from growing pains? A touch of laudanum in the cocoa. Trouble focusing on arithmetic? Try Dr. Bland's Brain Tonic. Side effects may include spontaneous poetry and a sudden appreciation for the color mauve. If little Henry seems unusually philosophical about the mortality of goldfish, don't worry, that's just the morphine syrup calming his nerves. And what about childhood milestones? First tooth, first steps, first time fainting dramatically during a spelling lesson? Each occasion is marked by a careful record in the family diary, and more often than not, a celebratory dose of something sedative. It's self-care,
But for 7-year-olds who've been asked to embroider their initials on 16 linen handkerchiefs before lunch, modern readers may clutch their pearls, but Victorian parents see nothing amiss. After all, children are resilient, especially when half asleep and blissfully unaware that their bedtime story comes with a liquid intermission. Parenting in this era is not about gentle encouragement, it's about preserving adult sanity and ensuring the nursery is a place of tranquil, well-ordered silence. There's always another bottle in the cupboard, and if you run out, the apothecary delivers. Of course, the next morning, the children wake up groggy but refreshed, ready to face another day of French lessons, formal meals, and the ever-present risk of being paraded out for the approval of distant relatives. If anyone asks about their quiet demeanor, just smile and mention excellent discipline. No one needs to know your secret weapon. So as you tuck your perfectly placid offspring into bed, remember, in Victorian high society, when in doubt, doze the children. Everyone else does. It always starts innocently enough. A little drop of laudanum in your tea, a soothing syrup before bedtime, a nerving tonic to take the edge off another soul-numbing lecture on the art of asparagus arrangement. But every trend has a tendency to get out of hand, especially in a society obsessed with both novelty and numbness. Welcome to the next stage of Victorian indulgence, the rise of the opium den, where the tea is a little too strong, the lamps burn a little too low, and even the potted ferns look slightly alarmed. You first hear about it from a cousin who knows all the best places. He whispers tales of darkened rooms behind unmarked doors, tucked just off respectable boulevards or hidden in the warren of alleyways behind the market. These are not the genteel salons of afternoon tea. Here, velvet curtains block the world outside. The air is thick with incense, and you'll see that beneath every waistcoat beats the heart of a man who's had quite enough. It starts at breakfast. The lady of the house is delicately dabbing her brow when requesting the faintest whiff of laudanum in her tea, while the children are already being lined up for their daily dose of soothing syrup. The husband, meanwhile, is gazing into the abyss that is his morning egg, knowing the only thing standing between him and a breakdown is the promise of gin by nightfall. Strong nerves, he's told, a steady hand, as if the only requirement for managing a household full of repressed emotions and furniture with names is an unwavering fondness for mutton. You slip into his shoes for a day, and it's a master class in quietly unraveling. The demands are endless. Overseeing the estate, fending off creditors, politely ignoring Aunt Edwina's opinions about the declining quality of governesses, and pretending to care about new varieties of roses in the garden. Each evening there's another dinner, another guest with a revolutionary theory about beetroot, another performance of stoic husbandry for the family and the staff. If you're lucky, you might even sneak away for a smoke and a brief, meaningful stare into the darkness. But the real sanctuary, the place where a Victorian gentleman can truly be himself, is the study. It's more than just a room filled with mahogany and overstuffed leather chairs. It's an emotional bunker, stocked with decanters, tobacco, and the one item that never appears in the family portrait, the discreet bottle of laudanum. For centuries, gin has been the Englishman's consolation, but in this golden age of chemistry, even the stiffest gin needs a little help. A splash of laudanum, a tonic chaser, takes the edge off more thoroughly than any London dry ever could. The ritual is almost poetic. The gin is poured, the laudanum measured out in drops with the same precision one might use to poison a troublesome neighbor's geraniums. The first sip burns, the second is easier. By the third, the world softens just enough that the prospect of hosting another poetry reading seems almost tolerable. Somewhere between the bottom of the glass and the end of the chapter on improved methods for gooseberry preservation, you remember how to laugh again, softly, so the servants won't talk. Social gatherings among gentlemen have developed their own code. Conversation in the smoking room is punctuated by meaningful silences, the occasional witticism, and the slow communal recognition that everyone is fighting a battle against the creeping sense of ennui. No one admits to needing anything beyond a little restorative, but the bottle gets passed around all the same. The occasional laudanum chaser is a mark of solidarity, if not exactly health.
Of course, every now and then someone overdoes it. Sir Reginald falls asleep on the billiard table, or Lord Quinby delivers an impromptu, utterly incomprehensible toast to the Queen's duendia. The ladies discreetly look the other way. After all, who are they to judge? Half of them spent the afternoon arguing with the Potter wallpaper. So as the sun sets on another day of keeping up appearances, remember the husbands are not okay. They're just quieter about it, lost in their studies, their gin, and their quietly heroic efforts to survive Victorian family life, one laudanum chaser at a time. Tomorrow brings another round, another evening, another silent toast to making it through. And in this house, that's enough. Not everyone in Victorian society coped with their daily anxieties by fainting into embroidered pillows or arguing with the wallpaper. Some turned their private turbulence into public art, wielding pens like swords, or perhaps more accurately, like paintbrushes dipped in a well of laudanum and late-night dread. Welcome to the era of the deeply unreliable narrator, where literature was less about realism and more about seeing just how many metaphors you could stuff into one sentence before the reader got dizzy. You, of course, are an aspiring writer, possessed by the spirit of the age. Maybe you've recently decided that your nerves are actually genius in disguise, and all you need is the right combination of solitude, candlelight, and a medicinal nightcap to unleash your literary brilliance. It's no coincidence that the apothecary's best customer has a notebook covered in ink stains and the haunted look of someone who's seen things, mostly in their own sitting room. The writing process begins in earnest after midnight. The house is quiet, save for the gentle creak of the pipes and the occasional ghost of a family member reminding you to mind the gas lamp. You pour yourself a generous cup of opium-laced tea for inspiration. Wrap a blanket around your shoulders and prepare to change the course of English literature. The first line is inevitably about fog. Victorian fog isn't just weather. It's an existential condition, a metaphor for society, for love, for the contents of your teacup. By the third paragraph, your protagonist is already lost emotionally, geographically, or both. There's a kind of feverish productivity that takes hold in these moments. You scribble furiously, convinced that each new line will shock and awe the reading public. Characters appear and disappear. Some are based on real acquaintances. Others may or may not be figments of your imagination or side effects of the evening's tonic. You might find yourself weeping over a single adjective, or experiencing a profound revelation about the true nature of pigeons. No one said art was easy. You're not alone. Of course, this is the golden age of literary self-medication. Charles Dickens famously walked the streets at night, notebook in hand, chasing characters through the smoggy labyrinth. Elizabeth Barrett Browning took her laudanum straight, and her poetry even straighter, filling her verses with longing, passion, and just a hint of chemical haze. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, centuries earlier, basically invented the hallucinatory epic poem after a particularly wild encounter with medicinal assistants. The Victorians did not believe in moderation, especially when it came to suffering for their art. Critics and fans alike lap it up. The more bizarre the plot, the more thievered the prose, the better. Greeting groups gathered to decode hidden meanings. Was the talking dog a metaphor, or did the author just spend a little too long with the apothecary's special blend? Newspapers run serialized stories with cliffhangers so dramatic that entire neighborhoods pause their dinner parties just to see if the heroine escapes the haunted milliner's shop. No one questions the blurred lines between inspiration and intoxication. In fact, the blur is half the appeal. Of course, not every experiment is a masterpiece. Sometimes you wake up to find that your grand poetic statement is just 17 pages about a missing umbrella and 3 increasingly desperate metaphors for rain. Your handwriting is a mystery even to yourself, and your dreams are haunted by the suspicion that you've plagiarized your own shopping list. But that's the charm of the era. In Victorian England, writers and dreamers are revered, envied, and just occasionally gently pitied. No one expects consistency from an unreliable narrator, least of all the author. All you can do is brew another pot of tea, sharpen your quill, and hope the next hallucination is at least grammatically correct. And in this society, that's more than enough for a spot in literary history. Life upstairs in a Victorian manor is a dizzying ballet of social anxieties, decorative bonnets, and tea with an undertow. But what about the world below stairs, here among the clatter of pans and the perpetual smell of boiled cabbage? The servants keep their own counsel, and as it turns out, keep closer track of their employers' medicinal habits than any physician ever could. If you want to understand how Victorian high society really operated, you need to peek behind the green baize door, where the true keepers of the laudanum ledger reside. Let's set the scene. It's Tuesday morning, and you're a housemaid with a schedule so relentless it would terrify a Marine. Already you've scrubbed 3 fireplaces, beaten 2 rugs, and, most importantly, refilled the silver decanter in Lady Whittingham's bedroom with exactly 3 teaspoons of laudanum, not a drop more. The last time she had 4, she mistook the butler for a visiting archduke and spent the afternoon reciting Byron from atop the pianoforte. Accuracy is essential. Upstairs, precision is a matter of social grace. Downstairs, it's a matter of job security.
Is an institution unto himself. He knows everyone's secrets, the vicar's fondness for cherry brandy, Sir George's hidden stash of Turkish cigarettes, and the exact strength of laudanum required to make the master of the house less disagreeable at breakfast. If there's a crisis, a shattered vase, a missing brooch, a guest found gently snoring in the library, he knows which bottle in the medicine cupboard to check before anyone rings for the doctor. Discretion is the butler's most prized quality. His real power, however, is in knowing when to add a little extra restorative to the tea tray and when to pour only hot water. Below stairs, the staff operate their own informal information network. Scullery maids trade stories about who's been sleeping through supper, who's asked for just a little more in their cocoa, and whose sudden enthusiasm for garden walks can only be explained by a double dose of nerve tonic. Cook, for her part, knows exactly which ingredients mask the taste of opium best, and which biscuits are reserved for days when the mistress is out of sorts. She also knows never to sample the gingerbread unless she wants to spend the afternoon in a gentle, floaty haze, humming old hymns to the pantry mice. Servants must balance professional distance with personal observation. They aren't allowed to comment, of course. That would be a breach of the most sacred trust. Never acknowledge the oddities of the family unless absolutely necessary, or unless you're certain the family can't hear you. Gossip travels fast on the back stairs. The footman may quietly note that Master Edgar's handwriting becomes much loopier after his tonic, while the lady's maid learns to distinguish between the resting and the truly unwell by the arrangement of teething things on the nightstand. All of it catalogued, memorized, never written down. Occasionally, the line between service and self-care blurs. After all, servants have nerves too, and Victorian houses are not short on stress. A long day might end with cook sampling just a sip of the special sherry, or the scullery maid borrowing a teaspoon of headache powder. The butler knows to turn a blind eye, provided no one forgets themselves and sings in the main corridor. The great secret, of course, is that the upstairs world depends on the quiet competence of the downstairs. Every cup, every dose, every carefully measured spoonful is a reminder that the real power in the house is not in the drawing room, but in the hands that fill the teapot. The servants know your secrets, your habits, your hidden stashes, and if pressed, could run a black market in laudanum with nothing but leftover jam jars and an encyclopedic knowledge of your bedtime routine. So the next time you wonder how your tea always tastes just right, remember the servants know, and they're not telling, unless of course you forget to tip at Christmas.
For years, the great and good of Victorian England have floated through the social season, buoyed by the gentle waves of opium-laced tea and an equally intoxicating disregard for moderation. But sooner or later, every party needs a chaperone, and for the entire British Empire, that chaperone wears black silk, carries the moral weight of a nation, and answers to the name Victoria. That's right, word of the great herbal craze has finally reached the palace, and Queen Victoria herself is not amused. It all begins innocently enough. A minor scandal, perhaps, involving a duchess, a teapot, and an impromptu recitation of ancient Greek in the middle of the Royal Albert Hall. Maybe it's just the growing mountain of anonymous pamphlets warning of the tea menace stalking the nurseries and drawing rooms of polite society. Either way, the Queen's advisors bring her news of the trend, and Victoria, no stranger to tragedy, headaches, or the occasional medicinal remedy, reacts with a level of alarm usually reserved for Irish rebellions or someone moving the royal asparagus tongs. The royal reaction is swift and absolute. First, a memorandum. Her Majesty wishes it to be known that the use of laudanum and other opiates in tea is unseemly and unbecoming to the moral character of the British people. Second, an investigation is launched, by which we mean a collection of minor lords, senior matrons, and at least one bishop are sent into society to observe who's looking a little too relaxed at their own supper parties. The whole thing takes on the air of a witch hunt, except instead of pitchforks, there are monocles, and instead of stakes, there are sternly worded notes. Naturally, the Queen's own habits are beyond reproach. Yes,
10. Victoria famously took laudanum during her own lifetime. Doctors insisted it was necessary for her nerves, and the all-consuming business of surviving 9 children, a moody husband, and a nation of perpetual fuss. But the difference, as her supporters claim, is that the Queen does everything in moderation, behind closed doors, and strictly for medical reasons. That means if you see her reach for a bottle, you look away, smile, and never ever mention it again. Etiquette is, after all, the cornerstone of the monarchy. The royal disapproval has ripple effects through society. Suddenly, afternoon teas become sober affairs, with nervous hostesses pretending not to miss their old friend, the amber bottle. Newspapers print stern warnings about the dangers of moral decline and the looming specter of national shame. It's the end of an era. Temperance becomes the new watchword, and even the most stubborn of socialites begin hiding their stash behind the good china. Still, not everyone is convinced. There's a quiet, stubborn resistance among those who know that a headache remedy is often the only thing that keeps Sunday lunch bearable. Rumors circulate that some members of the royal household are not as pure as the Queen would like. There are whispers of discreet doctors, secret recipes, and the odd footman tasked with procuring a tincture or two for medicinal use only. No one dares confront the monarch, of course, but among the upper crust, the game becomes one of wits. How to keep up appearances while still keeping up your old habits. As for the Queen, she remains unswayed by protest or plea. Her subjects must learn restraint just as she has. But history, as always, is full of ironies. For every stern royal pronouncement, there's a letter tucked away in a diary, a memory of one more peaceful night, and a lingering suspicion that even the strictest chaperone sometimes needs a little help to sleep. So, as you set down your perfectly innocent, definitely unfortified cup of tea, remember, in Victorian England, morality was a performance, virtue was carefully measured, and the Queen's disapproval was enough to turn vice into virtue, at least until someone found a new remedy worth hiding. If you think your modern physician is a little too quick to prescribe something for your trouble sleeping, you haven't met a Victorian doctor. In an age where every social ailment was treated with a confident wave of a prescription pad and an eye on the family's social calendar, the boundary between medical practitioner and enterprising apothecary was about as thin as a Victorian nightgown. Picture it.
You're reclining on the fainting couch, a half-eaten tea biscuit in one hand, a list of vague symptoms in the other. You call for Dr. Fotheringay, a man whose medical qualifications are rivaled only by the length of his mutton chops and the mysterious stains on his waistcoat. He arrives, black bag in hand, exuding the gentle authority of someone who's been paid not to ask questions. "What seems to be the trouble today?" he asks, as if the answer could possibly surprise him. You recite the usual, fluttering nerves, headaches, difficulty focusing on poetry, and the curious desire to nap through Cousin Mildred's engagement dinner. Dr. Fotheringay nods sympathetically, jots down a few notes, mainly about tomorrow's luncheon and perhaps your cook's recipe for seed cake, and prepares to recommend a therapeutic intervention. Out comes the pad, and with a flourish worthy of a Shakespearean actor, he writes, "Laudanum, take with tea, repeat as necessary, refills unlimited." Victorian medicine is a theater, and your doctor is both lead actor and backstage supplier. The rules are simple. No symptom is too small, no complaint too ridiculous. From housemaid's knee to melancholy of the spleen, there's a potion, powder, or syrup for every ailment, each more potent than the last. What truly matters is discretion. You don't want the neighbors to know your nerves are fraying, but you absolutely
Want the doctor to know. The relationship is 1 part confidentiality, 2 parts co-conspiracy. Sometimes your doctor is a little too enthusiastic. You find yourself the proud owner of a medicine chest containing enough controlled substances to start your own apothecary, or at least put on a very interesting garden party. Laudanum for sleepless nights, morphine for stubborn aches, bromamide for overactive thoughts, and if you're especially lucky, a bottle of energetic tonic with a label you can't read, but whose effects you feel almost instantly. You never question the ingredients. After all, if Dr. Fotheringay says it's medicinal, who are you to disagree? He's practically family at this point. There's a certain etiquette to these exchanges. Your prescription is written in code. No one outside the household must ever see it. You send the footman to collect it from the pharmacy, where the apothecary greets him by name and slips in an extra bottle for the lady's comfort. The lines between doctor, dealer, and discreet friend are blurred by the gentle haze of professional concern and financial incentive. After all, your doctor knows which families are best for business. But what about medical ethics? Well, let's just say the Victorian code is a little more flexible than the Hippocratic Oath. The doctor's job is to relieve suffering, and if that suffering just happens to be boredom, so be it. House calls are frequent, especially during the social season. If a particular remedy proves especially popular at tea, word spreads. Before long, half your circle is under treatment for everything from literary fatigue to emotional overexertion during embroidery. On rare occasions, things go sideways. Someone's tonic proves a little too invigorating, and Lady Plumbridge spends the night waltzing with the umbrella stand. Dr. Fotheringay is summoned at once, and ever the professional prescribes a restorative nap, a cool compress, and perhaps a milder tincture next time. Discretion, as always, is paramount. So next time you sip your prescribed tea, remember in Victorian England, the doctor wasn't just a healer, he was your most trusted supplier, your partner in plausible deniability. And if you played your cards right, the reason the luncheon was much more interesting than anyone could recall the next morning. Afternoon tea in Victorian England is meant to be a genteel affair. Soft-like, polite laughter, and a gentle haze of well-practiced denial floating above the assembled bonnets. But as every seasoned hostess knows, there's a fine line between a restorative cup and a recipe for disaster. It's the age of the artful overdose, where a little too much self-care can turn a quiet gathering into the social event of the season for all the wrong reasons. It usually starts innocently enough. You gather in the drawing room, each guest arriving with their best gloves and worst secrets. The table is laid, the laudanum discreetly decanted into a crystal cruet, and the first pot of tea brewed with the precision of a military campaign. The trouble, as always, is in the pouring. Who gets the good cup? Who might need a little extra today just to take the edge off Lord Puddleton's relentless stories about his travels in Belgium? The etiquette is unwritten but universally understood today.
The housemaid pours with a generous hand. Maybe she's in a charitable mood. Maybe she just wants to see what happens when Lady Arbuthnot tries to play whist on a double dose. The first sign is a certain dreamy slackness in conversation. Lady Marchmont begins waxing poetic about the tragic fate of her rose bushes. Miss Pringle, normally reserved, launches into an unsolicited performance of Hamlet's soliloquy with interpretive gestures. The laughter is a touch too loud, the compliments a little too effusive. Someone mistakes the umbrella stand for a long-lost suitor. The room spins gently at first, then with the wild energy of a fairground ride. No one is quite sure whose idea it was to add an extra splash to the teapot, but it's clear the blend has crossed.
The East India Company, ever the entrepreneur, moves from monopoly to scandal, eventually dissolving under the weight of its own corruption and the world's collective hangover. Still, its legacy lingers in every pot brewed on a chilly London afternoon. The absurdity isn't lost on anyone paying attention. The same society that clucks its tongue at the dangers of Oriental vices is happily sipping the products of war, addiction, and forced globalization. The irony is steeped as strong as the tea itself. Even the opium that finds its way into your medicinal tincture, your grandmother's cough drops, and half the poetry of the age is part of this great swirling trade network. Shipped across oceans, stamped by officials, and poured into silver spoons by butlers with a taste for irony. So next time you indulge in a calming cup of Victorian comfort, take a moment to toast the East India Company, the only organization capable of inventing an entire culture's rituals and then ruining them for profit. History, it turns out, is just another ingredient in the pot. And as any good hostess will tell you, a little scandal makes the tea taste even better. Being an aristocrat in Victorian England means carrying yourself with dignity, poise, and at least one excuse for every awkward moment. Add in a steady diet of opium-laced tea, and the excuses become not just necessary, but a refined art form. It's not addiction, it's a nervous constitution, darling, and the world must understand your delicate predicament. You've likely found yourself here before. It's the middle of a grand dinner. The chandeliers are blazing, and the conversation has taken a turn toward politics, or worse, parlor games. Your head is swimming. The wallpaper seems more conversational than usual, and you're fairly certain you just addressed Lord Pembroke's cravat as "my dearest friend." In times like these, you need a good excuse, and fast. The classics never fail. Fatigue is a favorite. Delivered with a sigh and a flutter of the hand, it can excuse everything from forgetting the plot of your own story to quietly dozing off during your cousin's area. If you've been caught talking to the wainscoting, simply declare you've been overcome by the vapors. Nobody knows what they are, but everyone agrees they're terribly fashionable. For a more subtle approach, blame the weather. Rain, sun, unexpected clouds, all are perfectly reasonable explanations for your general disarray. Should you find yourself napping through the first course or gazing wistfully at the dessert trolley while everyone else applauds Lady Harrington's poetry, there's always the fallback. "I'm recovering from a bout of nerves." This phrase is as flexible as it is vague. It works for headaches, minor scandals, and any situation in which you're not entirely sure where you are. The best part? No one will press for details, lest they be required to share their own story of sudden, unexplained malaise. Of course, some circumstances demand more creative explanations. If you've accidentally sent a love letter to the butler, or mistaken a fuchsia for your long-lost uncle, it's time to invoke family history. "My great-aunt suffered terribly from similar lapses," you might whisper, as if madness and mild social disaster are hereditary conditions best treated with another cup of strong tea. And if the situation escalates, say you're found wandering the garden in your nightclothes at noon, invoke the mysterious power of doctor's orders. It's astonishing how much can be justified by a vague reference to medical authority. "Dr. Fothering recommends plenty of rest and solitude," you announce, retreating to your room and closing the door on both scandal and responsibility. Let's not forget the importance of being slightly ahead of the trend. If your excuse sounds unique, it can set the tone for the whole season. "I'm suffering from an attack of aesthetic fatigue,"
you say, after accidentally rearranging the drawing room in pursuit of better spiritual energy. Or perhaps, my nerves are overtaxed by recent poetry readings. In a society obsessed with appearances, an original affliction can become next week's fashionable malaise. The real secret, of course, is that everyone is really playing along. Sure, you might be disoriented from a little too much King Rad or waking up in the arms of a garden gnome, but bet your fellow aristocrats have the same problems. So go ahead, blame the weather, your nerves, or even the furniture. Any excuse will do, as long as it is delivered with style and a small dose of confidence.
Is that everyone in your circle is making excuses. It's a shared language, a code of gentle denial that greases the wheels of polite society and keeps the conversation rolling. No matter how many cups of tonic have been consumed, behind every whispered apology and quiet exit, there's a mutual understanding. We're all in this together, and nobody actually remembers who started it. So the next time you wake up on the sofa with a half-finished sonnet and a vague memory of arguing with a fern, just smile serenely and blame the weather. In Victorian high society, the best excuses are always ready to serve, and sometimes they're all that stands between you and infamy. Just when Victorian society has perfected the art of gently floating through life in a soothing haze of tea and tinctures, along comes a movement determined to spoil the fun. Enter the temperance movement, a coalition of reformers, moralists, and professional killjoys, all convinced that somewhere, somehow, someone might be enjoying themselves too much. It starts with a whisper. At first, it's only a handful of earnest ladies handing out pamphlets at the market, warning of the perils lurking in every bottle and teapot. But the whisper becomes a chorus, and soon there are meetings in church halls, letters to the editor, and marches down the high street, complete with banners, bonnets, and the kind of righteous indignation only Victorians could muster. Tea, it seems, has become the latest battlefield in the war against vice. The temperance ladies are nothing if not persistent, armed with statistics, dubious testimonies, tearful, and a firm belief that self-control can be taught through loud singing and lemon water. They descend upon society events like a cold front. No party, luncheon, or charity bake sale is safe. Hosts scramble to hide their lordom, decant the port, and substitute cherry trifle with a particularly dreary apple compost. A few desperate souls even try serving temperance punch, which is in essence fruit floating in regret. Of course, their opponents are equally committed. There's a certain breed of Victorian who, upon being told to renounce their pleasures, simply invents new and more creative ways to enjoy them. Secret societies spring up, informal at first, then increasingly elaborate. Code words are exchanged at the door. Is the weather agreeable tonight? Decanters are hidden behind false panels, and the family doctor suddenly finds his services in record demand. The war on vice quickly becomes a game of hide-and-seek played with all the determination of a nation raised on double standards and cryptic etiquette. For every pamphlet warning of the dangers of stimulants, there's a rival broadside insisting that a little lordom is just what's needed to survive the tedium of another temperance lecture. Newspapers join in with competing columns debating the moral, medical, and spiritual merits of a properly dosed cup of tea. The result is a society in which everyone is either scolding, hiding, or pretending to agree, sometimes all three in the same afternoon. Still, the movement gathers steam. There are rallies, oaths, and pledges. Earnest young men with clean fingernails and slightly haunted expressions renounce drink and medicinal indulgence. Mothers patrol nurseries armed with bottles of vinegar and inspirational verses. The great Victorian project of self-improvement is now laser-focused on ridding the nation of its most comforting habits, one tear-stained testimonial at a time. But behind the scenes, reality persists. After all, the temperance ladies themselves aren't immune to nerves, headaches, or the occasional attack of malaise. It's not unheard of for the most vocal reformer to slip quietly into the chemist's for a little something for the nerves, or to take her special restorative before a particularly trying sermon. Publicly, the movement roars. Privately, the Lordan bottle is simply relabeled as soothing liniment. In the end, the temperance movement does change things, just not always in the ways intended. Society grows cleverer, more secretive, and even more inventive with its excuses. The war on vice becomes the great Victorian pastime, and everyone learns to appreciate the subtle joy of a well-hidden flask. So next time you raise your cup, toast the killjoys. They gave everyone something new to talk about, and in their own way, made hiding the fun half the fun itself. In a world where your corset is tighter than your social calendar and your bustle could knock over a side table, there emerges a garment of almost mythical status.
The tea gown. If Victorian fashion is a battlefield, the tea gown is a secret bunker, an act of rebellion swathed in ruffles and velvet, tailored for the high society individual who craves comfort but refuses to sacrifice a shred of style. It all begins with a dilemma. You've survived the ordeal of luncheon, your nerves delicately soothed with a cup of something fortifying, and now you're expected to change for afternoon tea. Traditional gowns are a feat of engineering, layers upon layers, buttons you can't reach, stays so rigid you can barely draw breath. Even sitting down is an exercise in advanced geometry. No wonder everyone's in a constant state of nerves. But salvation arrives in the form of the tea gown. Unlike your usual attire, this garment slips over your head like a gentle hug from a cloud. It's soft, flowing, and mercifully free of whalebone, steel, or the kinds of laces that make you question your will to live. Tea gowns are designed for one thing above all: comfort. And in a society obsessed with appearances, comfort is as radical as it gets. The design is meant to look effortless, though in truth it takes considerable effort to appear this relaxed. Fabrics are lush: silks, velvets, cotton, and prints as dreamy as a laudanum nap. Sleeves are loose, waists are gently defined, and if you spill your tea, nobody can tell because everything is artfully draped. The overall effect is that of a Grecian goddess who has just awoken from a very good dream, or perhaps a novelist on her third cup of medicinal inspiration. But the tea gown is more than just an outfit. It's a social signal. To receive guests in your tea gown suggests a life of leisure, refinement, and just enough rebellious spirit to thumb your nose at the day's stricter dress codes. "Oh, this old thing," you say as you float across the drawing room, pretending not to notice the envious glances from guests still suffering in their stays. It's understood that only the truly stylish can pull off such elegant nonchalance. Of course, fashion, like society, is always layered with contradiction. Tea gowns are technically private attire, meant to be worn only in the company of close friends and family, or perhaps the occasional sympathetic doctor. But as every hostess knows, the line between private and public is as blurry as your vision after a double dose of afternoon tonic. Before long, tea gowns are making appearances at larger gatherings, garden parties, and anywhere a hostess might hope to impress while also sitting comfortably. There are risks, naturally. Wear your tea gown too boldly, and you might be labeled eccentric. Too often, and it becomes clear to everyone that you've chosen comfort over tradition, a dangerous game in a society that still expects you to think gracefully at a moment's notice. But those who master the art of the tea gown never look back. They become legends, envied for both their taste and their ability to eat 3 scones without fear of snapping a corset string. So, the next time you imagine yourself in the gilding world of Victorian high society, remember, real power lies in the tea gown. It's the quiet revolution of the drawing room, a victory for comfort over constraint, for function over fuss, and for the very modern notion that fashion should actually feel good. And if anyone questions your attire, just smile serenely and offer them another cup. Chances are they'll wish they'd dressed for comfort too. There comes a moment in every era of excess when the tide turns and the party winds down, not with a bang, but with the soft, collective sigh of a society realizing that maybe, just maybe, the tea has gotten a bit too lively. Welcome to the Great Detox, the moment when Britain, having spent decades swimming in opium-laced comfort, is told that from now on, the tea will just be tea. The signs are subtle at first. A few of the more cautious doctors begin to murmur about side effects. Someone writes a strongly worded article in The Lancet questioning whether it's normal for entire households to sleep through thunderstorms, poetry readings, and the annual visit from Aunt Beatrice. Pharmacists start adding words like caution and moderation to their prescriptions, and suddenly, everyone knows someone whose cousin's friend once had a rather unfortunate episode involving a nap, a teapot, and the loss of a promising engagement. At first, society resists. After all, what is a Victorian drawing room without the gentle lull of a laudanum-infused conversation? The first attempts at detox teas are met with suspicion and, frankly, disappointment. "It tastes like boiled grass," mutters Lady Shrewsbury, eyeing her cup with the weary resignation of a woman denied her favorite vice. Hosts quietly compete to see who can sneak the most restorative into the sugar bowl without attracting the attention of the new wave of moral crusaders. But the momentum is unstoppable. Laws change. Laudanum is reclassified from a household staple to a substance of concern. The apothecary's secret menu grows smaller, and the only thing anyone can get without a signature is a headache and a cup of weak chamomile. The era of wellness tonic is over. Now it's all about purity, self-improvement, and the dazzling possibility of actually remembering what happened at last week's luncheon. Suddenly, society finds itself in uncharted waters. Conversations become clearer. People stay awake through entire dinner parties. The servants, secretly relieved, no longer have to measure out precise drops of medicine before every gathering. Lady Pringle's poetry readings are, for the first time in living memory, actually attended by people who know how they got there. Even the family pets seem more alert, if slightly less entertained. Of course, detox comes with withdrawal, physical, emotional, and above all, social. There are awkward silences where dreamy anecdotes once floated. Nervous laughter replaces philosophical debates about whether the wallpaper is watching you back. Some mourn the loss of their creative muses, while others are shocked to discover they have opinions about politics, weather, or the correct way to prune a rose. Life sharpens at the edges, and the British learned a new art of making small talk without the help of anything stronger than a psalm. And so the era of opium-laced tea fades into memory, leaving behind stories, cautionary fails, and a nation collectively wondering how on earth it all got so out of hand. People reminisce about the old days with the same nostalgia reserved for youthful indiscretions and questionable hats.
The china cabinets remain polished and proud, but their contents are now strictly above board. Still, some things endure. The ritual of tea survives, timeless, reassuring, and a little less dangerous. The clink of cup and saucer, the gentle murmur of conversation, and the promise of a moment's peace remain at the heart of British life. So, next time you brew a simple, honest cup, remember the great detox. Raise your teacup in a silent salute to an era when tea was anything but simple, and enjoy the gentle comfort of a world that finally decided to wake up.
(18) The sugar cubes melt faster, and the opium arrives by the barrel, courtesy of the same trade routes that bring letters from London and hats from Paris. Soon enough, word spreads. Nothing soothes the stresses of empire building quite like a nice cup of Lord-laced tea. In the tropical heat of Kolkata, or the bracing winds of Cape Town, settlers cling to their rituals with a desperation only homesickness can inspire. Social clubs appear where members only means knowing which teapot is for guests and which is for those in need of restorative encouragement. The language is coded. No one says vice, but everyone knows when the pink teacups are brought out, it's time to relax, forget the locusts, and ignore the elephants marauding in the garden. Not everyone approves. The local moralists, imported at great expense, warn against moral decay, citing tales of minor civil servants lost to the siren call of the apothecary's bottle. Missionaries frown, schoolmasters mutter, and the colonial administration dispatches circulars reminding everyone that temperance and moderation must be observed at all times. These circulars are, of course, best read after a fortifying cup. Meanwhile, the locals observe with bemusement as the British enact their rituals of polite oblivion. To them, the sight of a dinner party dissolving into gentle slumber or sudden inexplicable poetry readings is just another oddity of the colonial presence, like boiled beef on a humid afternoon or a man in full regalia melting into his armchair before sunset. Some are quietly scandalized, others quietly amused, and the wisest learn to keep a steady supply of strong, plain tea, just in case. Inevitably, the vice becomes a matter of status. The best houses boast the most exotic blends, the cleverest euphemisms, and the fastest runners to the apothecary when the guests get restless. Colonial newspapers, eager for stories more interesting than crop reports, begin publishing scandalous anecdotes of garden parties gone awry, of governors caught reciting Byron to the wallpaper, or of ladies fainting into punch bowls just as the visiting bishop arrives. Yet through all the hand-wringing, one thing is clear. Wherever the British flag is planted, the party finds a way to continue. Habits are exported, adapted, and eventually discreetly forgotten or quietly banned. By the time a new generation takes over, the opium-laced tea is a fading memory, replaced by something less dangerous, but perhaps also less fun. So next time you find yourself in a far-flung outpost, sitting on a veranda as the sun sets over someone else's empire, raise your cup, whatever's in it, to the enduring power of British tradition. For better or worse, the party always finds a way to follow. Decades after the last bottle of Lordum was quietly stashed behind the family Bible, its legacy lingers in the grand old houses of England. It's in the faded tea sets passed from hand to trembling hand, in the peculiar family stories recited every Christmas, and most of all in the personalities of descendants who can't quite explain why a gentle breeze makes them nervous, or why thunder inspires poetry and panic in equal measure. Welcome to the inheritance of Victorian vice. Generational trauma brewed strong and served with a polite smile. It starts in the attic among the boxes of yellowed letters and wedding gowns stitched tighter than most modern relationships. Perhaps you're the curious grandchild climbing up for a rainy afternoon's exploration. You find a diary, its cover cracked, and its pages full of observations about garden parties, nervous ailments, and a mysterious tonic poured at 4 sharp. There are entries about relatives you've only heard whispered about, great aunts who played the piano at midnight, cousins who insisted the wallpaper was alive, and the infamous summer when no one spoke to Uncle Henry because he tried to organize a séance using nothing but teacups and indignation. As you piece together the past, the patterns emerge. Every generation has its secrets and its soothing rituals. Some families pass down heirlooms in good silver. Yours has anxiety, a penchant for dramatic sighing, and recipes for restorative cordials best left untested at family reunions. Nobody quite remembers why great-grandmother refused to drink chamomile, or why there is an unspoken ban on discussing the year of the Great Teapot Incident. You just know that when the conversation gets tense, someone always suggests a cup of something to calm the nerves. The effects aren't only in the family stories. There's the cousin who naps at odd hours, the aunt who never sits with her back to the wallpaper, and the recurring joke that nerves run in the family, delivered with a laugh that's just a shade too knowing. Perhaps you've even caught yourself anxiously stirring your tea, feeling a little left out when everyone reminisces about the old days, as if they were all there for the invention of the anxiety attack. Modern science would call it inherited trauma, the invisible luggage handed down through generations. But in your family, it's tradition.
20. One question lingers in the modern mind. Are we really any better? The answer, like so much in history, is complicated, mildly embarrassing, and probably best avoided at family gatherings. It's tempting to believe we've moved beyond the age of questionable remedies. Our kitchens are free from opium-laced syrups. Our apothecaries stock only substances with reassuringly long warning labels, and our cups are filled with fair trade, single-origin coffee. Still, if you listen closely, you might hear the echoes of a world not so different from our own. A world where every worry has its tonic, and every generation is convinced that the last one was just a bit more unhinged. Modern life has swapped out the Lorden bottle for other comforts. We have wellness shots, energy drinks, adaptogenic powders, CBD gummies, and a bewildering array of all-natural tinctures marketed by people named Ashley. The promises are the same: calm your nerves, boost your spirits, help you sleep, help you focus, help you pretend you're fine when you're really not. The labels have changed, but the need to soothe, to escape, to carry on remains stubbornly familiar. And then there's the ritual. The office coffee machine is today's tea tray, the place where confidences are exchanged and anxieties are dissolved, if only for a moment, in hot, jittery comfort. There are apps for mindfulness and subscriptions for sleep dust. You might not faint at dinner or blame your wallpaper for moving, but you have definitely searched the symptoms of existential dread at 3 a.m. only to be offered 12 solutions, each more expensive and less effective than the last. The excuses have evolved too. Today, it's not the vapors, but burnout, seasonal affective disorder, or simply allergies. Instead of citing a nervous constitution, you can blame Zoom fatigue or information overload. The phrasing changes, but the impulse is timeless. To find language that makes our flailing feel more dignified, our overwhelm a little less awkward. Even your grandmother's stories about needing a little something for her nerves sound suspiciously like modern requests for a prescription and a week off work. Social media, the spiritual descendant of the Victorian tabloid, amplifies every trend and panic, offering new remedies, new scandals, and the same endless debates about what is proper, safe, or simply fashionable. Influencers recommend their latest calming blend while quietly hoping nobody checks the ingredients too closely. If history teaches anything, it's that human beings never met a shortcut to tranquility they didn't want to try at least once. So, are we really any better? Perhaps only in the sense that our teacups are safer, and our scandals, for now, are more likely to involve TikTok than tinctures. The rest, the search for comfort, the creative self-medication, the communal rituals of relief, endures. Some things never change. They just swap velvet for yoga pants, crystal decanters for blender bottles, and laudanum for oat milk lattes with a dash of magnesium. So tonight, as you tuck yourself in and scroll past the latest ad for calming mushroom powder, remember you are part of a long, absurd tradition. Raise your mug to the Victorians, to your own ancestors, and to every person who ever tried, in their own peculiar way, to make the world feel just a little softer. Because really, we're all just trying to find the right blend. Somewhere in every bustling Victorian town is the apothecary, a shop with more glass jars than good sense and the faint, sweetly alarming smell of camphor, licorice, and mystery. It's the hub of all things medicinal, from cough syrup to soothing syrups, from invigorating salts to secret blends for the nerves. And tucked away behind the counter, kept under lock and key, or more likely under a floorboard, is the apothecary's ledger, the unofficial diary of the town's secret indulgences. If you find yourself inside, you're likely greeted by a man with suspiciously well-manicured sideburns and a memory for names, faces, and preferred potencies. He knows who needs a tonic for headaches, who likes their tea fortified, and who simply wants something to get through Aunt Millicent's dinner parties. The real business is not what's on the shelf, but what's whispered across the counter. "I'll have the usual, please." That's the code. And with a knowing nod, the apothecary produces a brown paper packet or a small glass bottle, as if by magic. But the magic is all in the numbers. Each transaction is entered in the ledger with fastidious care. Mrs. Featherstone, 3-ounce laudanum for fortnight, increased to 4 after the birth of her 7th child. The Reverend Jenkins, a pint of bitters every week, no questions asked. Young Miss Apprentice, soothing syrup for nerves, though the label suggests it's mostly opium with a dash of orange peel, it's an open secret. Everyone in town has a page in the book, and the running tally is both a social map and a record of who is likely to survive another season. The ledger is more than mere bookkeeping. It's the community's unofficial pulse, revealing not just individual needs, but social trends. A spike in orders during Lent, too much introspection, a lull after the summer garden party, everyone exhausted and in hiding, and a mysterious upswing every time the temperance ladies threaten another pamphlet campaign. The apothecary is equal parts supplier and silent confidant. His discretion is prized as his latest shipment of Turkish rhubarb. How much is too much? That's the real question. The Victorian answer? As much as you can purchase, justify, and politely conceal. If the handwriting in the ledger begins to wobble, or if the monthly total for the Smith family suddenly rivals the vicar's sherry bill, the apothecary might gently suggest a lighter blend. But for the most part, the ledger is a study of denial. No one ever admits to overindulgence, just an unfortunate string of headaches, sleepless nights, or delicate nerves running in the family. For all the solemnity, there is humor in the routine. For external use only, is quietly ignored. Take as needed is interpreted as take whenever convenient. And consult a physician means asking the doctor who is probably already in the shop buying his own private supply. If a batch runs low, there's a flurry of polite panic, with society matrons sending anxious notes and even the most stoic butler appearing at the counter on urgent family business. And through it all, the ledger grows, page by page, a monument to a town's collective search for relief, however temporary, however gently euphoric. The apothecary never judges. He simply tallies bottles and smiles, knowing that in Victorian England, the answer to how much is too much is always quietly just a little more. So next time you wonder about moderation, remember the ledger. History is written by the victors, but in every town, it's tallied by the apothecary. If there's one thing Victorian society loves almost as much as scandal, it's a good wellness fad. The same people who swear by daily doses of laudanum are constantly on the lookout for Indian remedies, European hot springs, or surefire weight loss cures.
Look out for the next big cure. All in the name of health, beauty, and the elusive dream of waking up in a better mood. Some fads come from distant lands, others from the pages of popular journals, and all of them promise transformation, preferably before tea time. Let's begin at the Turkish bath. The local one is a tiled wonderland of steam, gossip, and questionable plumbing. You slip inside, greeted by clouds of vapor, marble benches, and a crowd of half-dressed acquaintances pretending not to recognize each other beneath the towels. The theory is simple. Sweat out your toxins, improve your complexion, and if you're lucky, overhear something juicy about Lady Pillington's third engagement. The result is a room full of wilted Victorians, pink as lobsters, discussing the benefits of being purified while secretly wishing someone would invent air conditioning. Not in the mood for steam? There's always the cold water cure. Health resorts across the country advertise the miraculous effects of plunging into freezing lakes at sunrise. The bravest are sent off by their friends who stay firmly wrapped in blankets to reinvigorate their constitutions and return, hopefully, before lunch. The medical claims are impressive. Cures for nervousness, insomnia, and even excessive fondness for pudding. But most participants just emerge with chattering teeth and a renewed appreciation for hot drinks. And let's not forget the tonics. The Victorian market is flooded with bottles, powders, and syrups, each boasting labels that promise glowing skin, strong nerves, and a personality as sparkling as soda water. Some contain herbs from the distant colonies,
Others rely on tried and true ingredients like arsenic, strychnine, or a splash of brandy for flavor. The instructions are always vague. Take as directed. By whom? No one is quite sure. If your hair falls out or your complexion takes on a faintly luminous quality, you're told it's a sign the remedy is working. There's a solution for every ailment. Pale arsenic wafers, sold by the dozen, will give you a fashionable, ghostly glow. Never mind the side effects. Anxious nerve powders, best taken with a glass of claret. Constipated? Try magnetic belts, electrotherapy, or a daily invigorating walk with your eyes fixed firmly on the horizon. The important thing is to look busy, ideally while reclining, so that everyone knows you're taking your well-being seriously. The wellness fad du jour sweeps through society like a polite epidemic. One week, everyone is drinking mineral water from a questionable spring. The next, it's cod liver oil and mustard plasters for all. The result? An entire generation convinced that true health is always one new product away, and that looking a bit unwell is a sure sign of sophistication. Of course, some fads are harmless, others mildly hazardous, and a few, like the widespread use of toxic tonics, are quietly abandoned after a rash of glowing complexions and unexplained dizziness sweeps the county. Still, the pursuit of wellness goes on. The Victorians may not always get it right, but they approach every new remedy with hope, curiosity, and a willingness to try anything once. So, as you sip your own restorative this evening, remember every age has its wellness fads. The labels may change, but the search for the next miracle cure remains eternal, and sometimes just a little bit toxic. In the upper reaches of Victorian society, tea is never just tea. It's an event, an alibi, a mild social sedative, and most importantly, a coded conversation that separates the in-crowd from the merely invited. There exists a secret language passed down from hostess to hostess, governing who gets which cup, what blend is on offer, and how to ask for what you really want without ever risking a direct confession. You arrive for your afternoon visit, nerves delicately frayed by London's latest carriage traffic and the existential threat of running out of hairpins. The drawing room is a symphony of chintz, the air thick with anticipation and odor cologne. You're welcomed with smiles, a flurry of air kisses, and an innocent-sounding question. Will you be taking the evening blend? It's not about the time of day. It's about how much laudanum you'd like in your teacup. Only the truly alert notice the tiniest twitch in the butler's eyebrow as he awaits your answer. Guests have their preferences, and the language is full of euphemisms. A restorative cup signals a desire for something a bit stronger. The house blend hints at a secret recipe known only to the apothecary and the lady of the house.